talking about the retake project with Steffan and Hughes in Betus Aguerville Koch near Corwen.
Yeah.
And Steffan, I've asked the first question: what work from the National Museum did you choose, and why did you choose it?
I chose this piece. It's a portrait of a Venetian trader's daughter, and I was just particularly interested in the whole kind of idea of it was something that was quite hard to see in the gallery space. It's hung quite high up on the wall. It's a large scale, life-size almost painting of a young girl, and I believe that there's a sort of partner piece which is a portrait of her brother, and that piece was shown in Boston in the 1950s, I think it was last seen, and nobody seems to know where that piece is, where that particular work has gone to. And it just so happened that it all came around at a time when my daughter, who Honey Jones Hughes, who is studying sculpture at Glasgow School of Art, went on an exchange visit to Mass Art in Boston. There was a connection for me in the work, in the daughter and the connection with Boston, and the connection via the tethered bird in a way. The piece is a portrait, but she has this pet bird that's tied with a red ribbon, and I just really like the red, and I really like the bird, and I really like the portrait. And as once I'd got an image of it from the BBC website, I started to see a lot more that was in it. I like the theatricality of it. That really relates to my practice anyway. A kind of sort of staged space. I'm really interested in that idea of staged space in work. And so we've got a foreground with a bit of ground and then sort of a tree down one side as a sort of framing device, and then this main feature, which is the girl and the bird, and then it kind of goes back in stages, and as you go further back into the work, it's quite hard to tell what's going on, but there's like a city in the very background. There's a strange sort of shipwreck in the foreground, a sort of toy ship, but a shipwreck nonetheless, and then two men on a horse, and a sort of strange folly type piece of architecture in the background. So I tend to work quite a lot on an iPad or in a sketchbook, because I need to be able to carry it around with me. I need to carry my studio with me. And I started to sort of use cut and paste to look at the structure of the work. So that was something that I was really interested in, and one of the main things was this sort of, this was the thing that really interested me in the work initially. I've got a fascination with using black and white and red. I particularly like the power of red in work anyway. So the red, I haven't used the red in the print at this point, but that links back to another inspiration, which is things like Hitchcock films, and particularly Vertigo and The Birds, and the use of red in those films. It's kind of like a signifier, particularly in The Birds, and you see the main protagonist is in red quite often throughout the film, and then there's a kind of link with a red car, and there's a red telephone box, and there's all sorts of things that, because of the nature of the colour in those films, with it being Technicolor, there's an intensity to the red, and I've always just really, and then that links back to my kind of interest in German expressionists and particularly the German expressionist printmakers who used black, white and red quite often. So there's I also have done a series of pieces in the past around about birds and birds that have been trapped, so there's a Welsh tradition which is called hunting the wren, which is mainly practiced in South Wales, or was mainly practiced in South Wales around St Stephen's Day, and the men of the village would go out and capture a wren and put it into a little house that had been made. So this kind of idea was something that, in this work where it's kind of cruel, but also the reason that it's done is because you want to protect it as well. So there's a sort of strange dichotomy between. I really like the way that you're drawn through the work. So, for example, the way that it's kind of like this, if you know what I mean. It's not. She's not looking at what she's holding. She's kind of looking away at the bird which is flying up there. So I kind of looked at this pattern on the dress and abstracted the pattern and started to play around with that just as a sort of starting point. It's really important. I mean, I'm really interested in things that are repeated, and I like sort of mass production, and I'm a printmaker and I like to do more than one of things anyway. So one of the things that I discovered I can do on the iPad, which I can also do with bits of rubber and things, is just sort of make a really simple stamp. And so I started to sort of just look at it in terms of pattern and how that changes it, and how it kind of, because it's actually not a great drawing. It's not a great. It's not meant to be a great drawing, a great observed drawing. I was just literally making visual notes at this point. But by repeating it, it started to build up into something almost like a Kerwin Press bookend, or Borden Revilius type thing in a very different format.
A3 size printout here as well. I mean, do you print off as part of the kind of iPad thing, or do you print off, or do you just kind of store them and then think?
I have to say that generally I don't print them out, but actually I was so excited when I printed them out, because they do manage to blow up to A3 quite nicely, and I think if I had a traditional studio space, I would probably really enjoy pinning these up, and I think that might actually lead to different things with the work. I mean, one of the things that I'm thinking about is whether the printed aspect of these, can be taken into 3 dimensions at all, or whether it has to stay as 2 dimensions. Started off with the bird as it is in the picture, in the original painting, and then the bird kind of dies. That changes that whole relationship of that piece of red ribbon, and it becomes a very sad red ribbon, as opposed to something that earlier on is more of a joyful line. And then she brings the bird back to life, because it's not dead, it's just exhausted. Part of my practice is that thing of a narrative. It's kind of almost illustrative, but it's not illustration, because I don't work necessarily as a commercial illustrator, but the work is illustrative, and I do like the tradition of narrative work. Whether it's Ken Kiff, or whether it's Paul Arago, or whether it's going right back to Giotto and Dura and those kind of narratives. That's always been a real sort of inspiration to me. I also saw this really strange. There's this really weird sort of pet dog in the very foreground of the work, which looks like one of these sort of toy dogs that you get now, you know, sort of. My dad had a pull-along dog when he was a child, you know, sort of stuffed toy on wheels.
Yeah.
And he actually gave it to my other daughter, Ellie, and that kind of, it has a feel of this particular dog. It's not, almost not real. The more I looked at it, because I got interested then in the shipwreck as well, you know, that the idea of playfulness, but, and then how real is that landscape behind the person, and is it a real landscape at all, or is that completely made up, and is it a toy ship, or is it a real ship that's been, and so all those things started to just play around with me. And then I like to use found materials, so this is an interview by Bill Grundy, 1976, with the Sex Pistols, which was a free thing from The Guardian years ago, and I just really liked the format of the book, and I used that as a starting point for some drawings of plants that I thought may or may not feature in that foreground area, and I might sort of start to play around with them. And then going back to that idea of the the sort of stamping idea, quite often I'll introduce that into my work. I suppose the most recent aspect of the whole project has been to develop it into a lino cut. So I kind of cut a lino, and then again, by its nature, what it does is changes how much information you give, or the types of information that you give. The horse and the two gentlemen, that kind of almost becomes insignificant, but it is significant because it's still there, but it's not as clear. So I was trying again to create that theatrical space, I suppose, but by giving as much information to the things in the foreground and less to the ones in the background. Well, each process it has its own quality of mark making, and so you really have to think carefully about how you make a mark for lino, or for any print actually, because it's permanent and it's there, and it takes a long time to cut out and get it ready to print. Whereas with the drawings, and this is why I've always been really interested in drawing processes as well as printmaking processes, but the drawing process can be relatively quick and immediate, whereas to make an image, a printed image, takes a lot longer, and there's that whole kind of thought process behind it, in that you need to it's more of, I suppose it is more of a craft design process in a way, even though it's a fine art. I think that's definitely a 21st century artist's approach, is that I have a certain sense of freedom to be able to make the work that I want to make, and It's not a commission for somebody else. The house is like a studio. I live with Jeanette Orrell, we're both artists, and we have work all around us, so our life is like a studio. But then that said, I think there is a lot to be said for having a physical studio space as well. So with this, I do feel that the lino cut is a completion. Whereas I feel that these are still in progress things, even though they, so for example on there you've got elements of the story, and in here as well, but they've kind of gone further. But I'm not sure that a piece of work had developed out from it. I would say that this is the piece of work that's developed out of that relationship with that painting. But now I'm ready to look at new things.
Yeah.
And I would say that that's absolutely where I am. I'm glad to have known the painting, but now I can move on.
Yeah. Goes when it leaves the studio, when you've made something, you've sold something in an exhibition, or it's gone.
I think it's really exciting when I sell work, and when I take when works get shown in exhibition elsewhere. I'm really excited about that, because I feel like they're very much part, making a piece of work, whether it's a print or a drawing or a painting or whatever it happens to be, is very much part of yourself, and it's a very personal relationship that you've had, and I actually love the fact that when they go out there, they're set free, and they and printmaking particularly, that's a really big part of it, in that you can send prints to places and they start a new life without you somewhere. And it's really to the whole kind of, because you forget what you've made, over a period of time. You absolutely forget how much work you've made and where it's gone to.
And what do you like about working in North Wales?
I like the space that you get mentally working in North Wales, because you can go for a walk every day. You drive through beautiful scenery every day, and I find that that's really helpful in terms of my creative process. A long time ago, I used to run every day through the landscape, and I found that was really a good way of earthing myself, in terms of it would help me to clarify thoughts as I was running through the landscape. But I do tend to walk every day, and I find that is probably the most important thing about working in North Wales. It's an hour and 10 minutes to get to Liverpool, so we do go to Liverpool quite a lot to see exhibitions. But equally, it's an hour to Llandudno, and we'll go to Mostyn, or we'll go to Barmouth and watch a National Theatre of Wales event, or Wrexham for work. There's a whole lot of things within reach, but it is very isolating at the same time. And I wouldn't say it's right for everybody. And I'm really glad that the house that I live in, I have a direct connection with the house, in that I discovered that when I'd moved in here, my great-grandfather delivered post here. So there's a sort of, and that's a really interesting connection with place. And then the village where we live, there's this connection with Augustus John, who had a bare knuckle fight with the king of the gypsies in this village square, and so it feels like a creative place, and then you've got the sort of pilgrim routes that run through it. So we've got a pilgrim route that there's a rood screen that's a medieval rood screen in the church in the middle of the village that's been rubbed by centuries of pilgrims, and I can walk on that same route every day if I want to.
Sure. So
there's something about the power of narrative and storytelling that definitely is part of this place. It's a kind of creative identity, I suppose, isn't it? Everybody is affected by their environment. I could be a completely different person and come and live here and just be overawed by the landscape. And Jeanette does a lot of landscape drawings, or has done a lot of landscape drawings, but the landscape only interests me to a certain, it's a means to an end, the landscape. I like seeing it, and I like walking through it, and I like the potential for narrative that exists within that landscape. It's the buildings, the people, the places, the stories, the folklore, the history. That is what really interests me, and it is rich with that in North Wales.
Or a project or anything that...
I can't wait to see I mean, I know it's on the blog,
Yeah.
but the blog is one thing, but actually I'm really intrigued to see what people, talk to people about what they've been doing, because it is such an interesting project, and it does cover so many different starting points, really.
Sure. Yeah, that'd be good. Great, well thank you Steffan very much for letting us into your studio.
Thank you.